Greetings and felicitations.
Hip hip hurrah, tally ho.
Starpod Trek, we're doing another review episode. We're breaking down episodes, we're looking into them. It's such a joy revisiting these classics. Aren't you having a fun time doing this, baby doll?
Yes, I am. It's very nostalgic and we enjoy all these episodes.
So let's review, let's see what the commentary has to say in Alan Asherman's Star Trek Compendium under the heading The Corbomite Maneuver.
Okay, this was written by Jerry Soule, director Joseph Sargent, stardate 1512.2. While attempting to explore an uncharted area of space, the USS Enterprise is confronted by an alien warning buoy. The starship's phasers destroy the radioactive buoy. Soon afterward, a gigantic spherical starship, the Fesarius, traps the Enterprise, and an alien voice promises destruction in 10 minutes. Spock's reference to acknowledging defeat in the game of chess leads Kirk to recall the game of poker. The captain stages a desperate bluff, telling the alien commander, Baylock, that Federation ships are equipped with a self-destruct system called Corbomite, which would also destroy any attacker. The destruction of the Enterprise is temporarily averted. Later, when the alien separates from the main body of his ship and seems to be in distress, Kirk goes to his rescue. Finally, the frightening alien is revealed to be a puppet operated by a childlike entity who has been testing them to determine whether Kirk and company are truly peaceful. Diplomatic relations are established, and Mr. Bailey, who had lost his nerve awaiting Baylock's death threat, volunteers to remain on board the alien ship as an exchange student.
So, let's look at the writing, the cast, who was involved in that. One of the key factors is it's written by Jerry Soule, and he's known for his work on Twilight Zone previously.
Yes, he's an excellent writer, and this was something that Star Trek did back then, was having established writers.
And when we look at this episode, it almost does have a Twilight Zone feel to it, where it develops characters, it addresses a situation, we are anticipating something to happen with the antagonist, and then the last 3 minutes of the episode, it's very different than what we're expecting. So it's kind of curious that we have someone with a Twilight Zone background writing for Star Trek.
Yes, there was a build-up and then a nice twist at the end.
And this is the first of many times that this is going to happen, where we have writers go back and forth between Star Trek and Twilight Zone. But by this time, Twilight Zone had already been off the air. Directed by Joe Sargent. It was aired on November 10th, 1966. It was aired out of order from how it was produced. So even though this comes story-wise after Where No Man Has Gone Before, it was not aired as in that order.
This one was, I think it was something like the 10th episode aired. It was down the line, but it was really the first episode after the second pilot, the first regular season episode.
Yes.
It was made.
So we're seeing they're still working on the characters and visually how they look. Mr. Spock's hair is still a little bit disheveled. Lieutenant Uhura is wearing a gold uniform during this time. Apparently, they found out that the velour was shrinking after they washed it. That's why in this episode, they're tighter than in other episodes. So they were still trying to figure things out with even the clothing department. And this was because it was so early on in developing these characters. The script instructed Leonard Nimoy to emote a reaction of fear when he sees the Baylock puppet. But then the director, Joe Sargent, said, instead of being fearful, reply that it's fascinating. And guess what? That stuck. Because that's what became Spock, one of his phrases that he became known for saying.
Fascinating. And I remember reading an interview with Leonard Nimoy where he said That was crucial in Spock's development, because the director also told him, well, not just to say it, but to kind of say it in a detached sort of way.
Yes.
And so he did, and that's the way that sort of developed Spock's more unemotional attachment to everything that he said most of the time.
And we see that at this time, the character of Uhura, she wasn't developing much. She was still primarily a background character, though Mr. Sulu was able to jump at the helm. Previously, he wasn't on the bridge.
He was the astrophysicist before, and now he's going to be a regular at the helm. And yeah, he had a few significant lines in this one. He was across from Bailey, and they had several lines together.
And this is the last time we're going to see Bailey. In fact, it was played by Anthony Call. And because of the end of the story, we're never going to see him again on screen.
And that was interesting, too, because the way it ended, when I first saw this, I couldn't tell, do they intend to get Bailey back? I mean, Kirk did say he would get a better officer in return, so it sounded like he expected Bailey to come back, but we never see him again.
Hey, let's discuss that when you first saw it. I mean, we were both young when we saw it. I remember that it was the ending that stuck with me more than the entire show when I was very, very young, because I was excited to finally see the episode where that iconic puppet of Baylock was featured in, because that scene of Baylock's face, or the puppet of Baylock, was always in the end credits, and I didn't know what episode it came from, because I watched them out of order. I watched them whenever they came on.
Yes, exactly.
So that was the exciting part for me, to see, wow, all right, now I have a point of reference of where this end credit photo came from. So that was my earliest response that I remember as a child.
So you were watching the episode, and then you see that puppet with the deep voice, and you're going, oh, I've seen that before.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. But it was great at the end to have the twist to find out that Baylock was, the image you first saw was just a puppet. But it was something they used in the end credits, because it must have been something that was good for a sci-fi show to show something that's much more alien looking than a lot of the humans we see on the show.
It was.
Star Trek Trivia. Question number 1. How many degrees of overlap does Spock allow during the star field photography? Question number 2. How often does McCoy give Kirk a physical?
Let's talk about Ron Howard's brother in this episode, Clint Howard. This is going to be the first of other appearances that he's had in Star Trek universe.
In Star Trek and other things. But yes, I know Clint Howard also appeared on the Andy Griffith show, which, because Ron Howard was a regular on that show. Mm-hmm. And Clint Howard played this little kid that had I think he had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and he didn't even talk, but he was just this cute little boy, And so he goes on to play an Orion on Star Trek Discovery. Mm-hmm. Many years later.
Yes.
So seeing him in this episode as a child, that was such a cute ending.
Now this is one of the many times McCoy is that he references his being a doctor and not a something else. This is the first episode where he says, "What am I, a doctor or a moon shuttle conductor?"
So that was his first of that type of line.
Yes.
And it was interesting, too, because McCoy saw the red alert, and he just ignored it and just kept on with the physical for Kirk, because Kirk doesn't do a lot of physicals. He never has time. So McCoy was thinking, well, while he's there, we're going to go ahead and get this done.
And when we look at that ship, that giant ship, the Viserius, the original one was made of ping pong balls glued together. And we could see how that looks because it's a series of balls. It's really pretty impressive what they were able to do on a limited budget back then in 1966.
I think it did look like a bunch of balls, but it still looked very real to me when I was watching it. And then in the remastered version, where you could see more details, it still looked good. In the remastered, you could see more of the surface that the white balls were connected to. And that just looked awesome. It was, you could see little lines in it and everything, and it still looked like an alien ship. It was great.
Also, the fact that, well, let's talk about that. We watched the Roddenberry Vault Edition on our last rewatch. So the Roddenberry Vault Edition restores additional footage that was not seen in the remastered version or the original version. So yes, we did see the cleanup version in our last rewatch, but also, what did you think about having additional footage in there with the Roddenberry Vault Edition?
I think it made it too long. I mean, there's a reason that footage got cut out, I think. I know it happened right after, when the Fesarius showed up. It was sometime after that and before the smaller ship with Balok, separated itself from that ship. So there were some other scenes in there that just made it kind of long and boring. And so I was glad to know that that was a part they cut out. And this is the one where Spock said something like, he reminds me of my father, and Scotty said, "May heaven have helped your mother."
And that is wonderful that early on that we've established something about Spock's character that would be developed further. That he had a human mother, but a Vulcan father.
Yes, yeah, when he said that his mother considered herself a lucky Earth woman. Mm-hmm. Now, one person's interpretation is that Spock was, to someone else, it sounded like Spock was referring to his parents as if they had passed away. But I didn't really think of it that way. I just thought
I've heard that too. Yes, yeah. Past tense. Yep. And we wonder,
Did they intend for his parents to be dead at the time? But then maybe they decided to change it later. But we are glad that we got to see his parents and that they're not dead yet at this time.
And we mentioned how this was filmed or out of order from the way it was viewed. The reason being is because there was so much work to do on special effects. And for an early show like this, we could see that the special effects did make a big impact. There was quite a bit in this episode. Even what was impressive, when they showed the spinning cubes, they showed the light flashing on the faces of those on the bridge, implying that they were seeing the reflection on the cubes. Just details like that showed that there was quite a bit of imagination on the production level of this show.
Part of the reason they aired the episodes in a certain order was they were showing, well, like this episode is finished, so we can air it now, but the other one was not finished yet.
Yes.
But another thing about the lights, so it was in the remastered version where the lights on the cube, like the people on the Enterprise, you could see lights,
it was more
the same color as the cube.
Yeah, it was much more brilliant.
Yes, it was more noticeable.
Yes, totally.
And Kirk bringing up Corbomite, which was really a bluff. You know, that was something that I had thought of, like, okay, what are some things on Star Trek that didn't really exist, such as Corbomite, and then that they had other things. Other things that don't exist would be like Fizbin, the Vulcan Death Grip, Chekhov's brother Pyotr.
Okay. Wow, it's amazing you thought of that.
It was something, I think I submitted that to the Nitpicker's Guide one time, but they never printed it, and I thought that was brilliant when I thought of it. Star Trek Trivia. Okay, question number 1. How many degrees of overlap does Spock allow during the starfield photography? The answer, 1. Question number 2. How often does McCoy give Kirk a physical? The answer, quarterly. And I want to say, too, that about the mention of chess in this episode is important. And we had already seen Kirk and Spock play chess. Mm-hmm. Oh, but of course in the air date order, I don't think anyone would have seen. Oh yeah, they would have, because this one was aired like 10th episode or something. Mm-hmm. So in Where No Man Has Gone Before, Kirk and Spock played chess. And having Yeoman Rand, this was her first appearance. Mm-hmm. And Kirk saying like, well, who's the guy that gave me a female yeoman? Which was, I don't know. Well, you know, because this was a product of the 60s, and so they had to think of things a certain way.
But it's interesting because it shows that, well, hey, let's go back to what we know about the cage. And you remember that Captain Pike's yeoman was a male, and he died?
Yes.
And so he was his best friend, if I'm not mistaken.
That is, I'm not sure if they said it on the show, but it's what we got later from the comic books, right?
Yes, and some of the outside material. So we can see that Kirk was married. He already had a female in his life.
The Enterprise,
That's
yes.
it. And he didn't want any distractions. So this tells us something more about Captain Kirk's character. I think the Kelvin Universe movies kind of ruined that. They made him just a real jerk. But Captain Kirk, his focus was on the ship, and he didn't want any distractions. So early on, that line established something about his character as well.
That he wanted to stay focused, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Which, and we don't know that Rand would have done, I mean, I don't want to say she was really that much of a distraction. We know that for the show, she was just added to have something more to look at on the show. But she did have she had a few standout episodes later on. And her idea about heating up the coffee with a phaser, I mean, at least that shows that she had some intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And getting back to David Bailey as well, he was such a, he was so emotional in the beginning, and as they said, he was young and he was probably promoted too soon. It was just, it's a great way to show that these characters are really not perfect, and that there are other things, all these kind of things that could be happening on the ship, and running drills, and on the drills they were like 94%, and Kirk said, well, let's try to get to 100. So they, I think they tried to make it very realistic in that way, showing these are humans that are people that are working on something. They have these goals, they have their needs, and the certain way that they react to things in space and their missions. I mean, that was another part of the show that I could relate to, how realistic it was, how they tried to show the human condition so well.
So overall, after rewatching it, let's ask ourselves, does it still work? Is it still Star Trek that's relevant? How did you feel about it afterwards? And does it fit within the rest of the Star Trek universe, or does it build on anything that comes forward?
I think it does fit. This one was a good episode showing how people are not what you think they are. Someone who shows up, like the cube that showed up at the beginning, and they weren't sure if it was a threat or not. And then the huge ship showing up, and they didn't know what to do about that. And then in the end, it turned out to be a friendly alien that was testing them. This is what Star Trek is about, that there's just the unknown. As Kirk said in this episode, there is no unknown, just things that we don't know yet, things we don't understand.
This is an episode that I recommend to people who have never seen Star Trek before and want to know what Star Trek is like, because it includes a lot of elements that we've come to expect of Star Trek, like you just mentioned, the exploring the unknown.
Yes.
Not just firing first and asking questions later. This is an exploration vessel. We're also getting character development on multiple levels. We're finding out about Kirk, what some of his habits are, Spock, his background. We're seeing the interaction with many of the crew members on here. Yeah, excellent episode. It's so rewatchable.
Yes, like Sulu and Bailey having their little talks, and Bailey talking to Spock saying about the adrenaline, and Spock saying, "Have you considered having it removed?" And there was some humor in it and some adventure. This is probably one of those that they would call a bottle episode, because most of it took place on the ship, except at the very end.
And that was a redress of Kirk's quarters. We know that oftentimes that the quarters were redressed for different functions. So essentially, yeah, it was all done in the studio. There was nothing on the exterior scenes. Yeah, just
what they did with the ships, which was all done later in editing.
Yes.
So it was a great story. It was just about how about the alien who, that you think is your enemy turns out to be your friend. And at the end, when they rescued him instead of, because he had sent out a distress signal, which was actually fake, but they didn't know that, and they still wanted to help him even after everything that had already happened.
For more than 2 centuries, all destructive energies have been deflected successfully by indestructible and invincible Corbomite
All right, so now let's talk about things outside of this episode in medium. Well, there isn't a lot. There weren't so many. We couldn't find any comic books that dealt with what happened afterwards with Lieutenant Bailey leaving the Enterprise. But there is a book about it.
There is a novel called Face of the Unknown by Christopher L. Bennett. And the novel continues the story of Balak's people and the First Federation. And it turns out that the First Federation, as he calls it, has many other different alien races, and they have their own planet that they live on together, and they're hiding from their enemies. Their enemies are actually this race, the Dasik, and they are the ones that he made that Balak puppet. That was actually their enemy race. And as far as Bailey, he was actually, it turns out he stayed with the First Federation to be the Federation ambassador to them. And in this book, he had been with them for 3 or 4 years. So it kind of seems like to be with them that long, it's almost like he's not going back to Starfleet. It's a good book, and it is a good continuation of this. It answers all the unknown questions.
And also, there is a book version of the episode in the James Blish Star Trek novel, number 12. We know how they collect all the episodes and make them in a compact form. Oftentimes we're looking for differences with the episode. This one we really didn't find anything. The novel version stayed pretty close to what was aired.
Most of it was the same. They had a lot of the dialogue was the same. Something noticeably different was the physical. When Dr. McCoy was giving Kirk a physical, it was completely different. It said that Kirk was wearing shorts and that he was doing something where he had to move both his arms and his legs, where on the show he was wearing his uniform trousers and he was only moving his legs, right? He was lying on his back and pushing the
he had no
thing with his
shirt on.
legs. Right.
Right, yes.
So that part was changed, and aside from that, I think most of it just stayed pretty close.
Yeah, but those are great reads.
Explorers take our advice. It's incredible and invincible and impervious and indestructible. Corbomite.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.